Right. Good morning, councillors. Tēnā tātou katoa. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy, while working in the best interests of our community. So, welcome councillors, officers and members of the public, if there are members of the public here. This is our last governing body, in fact, last committee of the whole meeting. You're not meant to chair, Councillor Casey. You worked very hard to get here, but equally, I think everybody is, most particularly our staff members, are looking for a break. So maybe I'll say a few words about that at the end of the meeting. I have apologies for early departure from Councillor Fessel-Collins, and are there any other apologies? I do have a motion. Actually, before I go to electronic attendance, I'll move that we accept the apologies. Actually, Councillor Wayne Walker, you're leaving early too. Maybe. There is no room in the apologies for maybes. Okay, so I move that we accept the apology from Councillor Collins and Councillor Walker for early departure. Do I have a seconder? The Councillor Filipino? Yep. Filipino? I told you it was late in the year. Councillor Al Filipina.
Thank you, Worship. Interesting enough, I actually text Councillor Collins and spelt my name Filipina. So look, what you've just said is actually quite comforting, Your Worship. But look, I received a text from Councillor Bartley, and she may not be attending as she is with her parish priest in hospital. So I just wanted to foreshadow that in the event that she does not attend, Your Worship. So no,
thank you.
She's in there supporting the.
Thank you, Councillor Filipina. So I'll add to the apologies, Councillor Josephine Bartley. I did see her note that her local parish priest is very ill. So it's been moved and seconded that we accept those apologies. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. For electronic attendance, I move that we accept electronic attendance for Councillor Shane. Councillor, he was there, so it's Councillor Sharon Stewart. So I'll move accordingly. Seconded by Councillor Wayne Walker. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Are there any?
Just making sure you can hear me.
I can hear you perfectly, Councillor Stewart. So welcome to the meeting. Are there any declarations of interest from councillors about any item on the agenda today? If not, I'll move that we confirm the minutes, two sets of minutes, the 26th of November 2020 and the 9th of December 2020, the extraordinary meeting of the governing body, seconded by Councillor Sayers, moved by myself. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come now to public input. First of all, there is a declined request from a representative of the organisation All Aboard. That is declined under Standing Order 7.7.2 on the basis that that is a matter more appropriate to go to the Planning and Environment and Climate Change Committees. So the person has been referred accordingly and will attend, I think, in the new year. We have an approved request from the Northern Action Group in relation to item 10 on the agenda. So if Bill Foster is here, Bill, if you'd like to come forward. Are you on your own today? Sorry? Are you on your own today? Yep. Well, welcome, Bill. Merry Christmas to you. Thank you for coming down all the way from Wellsford, I think.
Well, from Warkworth.
Warkworth, okay, well, that's a terrible mistake to make. You'll know the normal procedure. There is 5 minutes for you to make your presentation. There's a chance for up to 3 councillors to ask questions. There won't be any comment or debate in this session. That will be reserved for item 10, and you're very welcome to stay for item 10. So welcome, Bill, and you may begin your presentation.
Mr Mayor and councillors, thank you very much for allowing me to speak briefly in support of the motion from Councillor Sayers and his colleagues. And let me also acknowledge the staff report, which is complimentary about our submission, but reasonably enough asks you to consider whether now is the right time for a representation review. NAG is supporting this proposal now because we believe it's the right thing to do and that now is the right time. The current situation is that Rodney is unique amongst all local board areas. 64% of the population is rural or lives in rural settlements. As we point out on page 5 of our submission, the needs and wants of people in small urban areas for local government services are different from those of people in rural areas. The Kaipara Harbour is also a specific feature of Rodney, and split representation regarding land, environment and Maori interests has been an ongoing issue. The result at the moment is our representation is currently non-complying, unequal and unbalanced. In our proposal, which you'll have seen, I won't go through it, a feature of this is that it also creates a real opportunity for Maori representation within the existing legal framework by allowing iwi to nominate or support one or more candidates for the substantially rural subdivision proposed. And let me add here generally that I doubt that this approach that we're proposing for Rodney applies in any other local board area, even in Franklin, which is also rural, because that would require recognition of non-contiguous subdivisions. That means areas which aren't together, and that's never been considered to date in structuring representation groups. The benefits of our proposal, I submit, are significant. Common rural service level interests will have unified representation, and small urban service level interests will be consolidated and focused. It minimises changes and keeps the existing boundaries as much as possible. We suggest leaving Dairy Flat unchanged, but it could be considered rural because it is a rural area. And the Maori guardianship role over rural Rodney gets recognised. A single subdivision representation of Kaipara Harbour is proposed. And the result of our proposal would be representation is complying, equal and balanced. I doubt any of you would probably have a problem with this proposal being considered as a suitable initial proposal for the next representation review. So the question is, why do this now rather than wait until the next review is required? Well, you have a primary responsibility as the governing body to ensure that the representation basis for each and every election is fair, balanced and as equal as possible. An opportunity to improve that basis from new thinking is not something that ever may be or should be deferred. Also, Council currently faces a major communications and public relations challenge in consulting on unpleasant decisions to deal with a crisis revenue shortfall. At a time like this, I would think the opportunity to offer ratepayers, through a representation review, an exercise in democratic decision-making and accountability to the people who are being asked to bear the financial burden would be a welcome overlay, not to say a diversion from, inevitable criticisms of governance, management, accountability and performance. A review now will show during a time of difficulty that Auckland Council always puts people first. For the people of Rodney, this really does matter. There have been some negative comments which have surfaced from our proposal. I'd just like to say firstly that we are not here to praise or criticise any of our elected representatives or the outcome from their decisions. That's not the substance of this proposal. It's about the basis of representation, not performance or outcomes. Also, future uncertainty is not a reason to defer anything. Speculation and uncertainty may substantially reduce or confuse the quality of information available to make good decisions today. but they are never reasons to delay making good decisions. Proceeding with the representation review now with a proposal for only limited changes at minimal cost may allow you to defer the next full review as long as till 2028. That would be well after the disruptions from COVID and major decisions currently facing Auckland and local government in general in New Zealand have been made, and when the light at the end of the tunnel makes their implications more clear. So NAG asks you to support Councillor Sayer's motion and proceed now with a focused representation review. Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'll close off the question list now because I've already got 5 questioners, so can you please be precise in your question so we can maybe get through 5 on this. The first question is from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Thanks, Bill. How would you be proposing that input be received from the local board, for example, and the IMSB? Obviously, they're not here because they're not on the governing body. And do you anticipate any issues around that?
I don't think there are any issues there. I would just say at the outset that one of the reasons for not engaging the local board in the proposal initially is that, firstly, the governing body is responsible for representation issues, not the local boards, and that clearly local board members in Rodney would have a conflict of interest in that their representation and their election currently depends on the basis of representation on which they were elected. So the right time for them to contribute as individuals, because I don't think the board can actually form a view on this issue, but the right time would be when the initial review proposal is put out. The same would obviously be true for the Independent Maori Statutory Board, which I think needs time, as always, to consider these issues, and the best way to get their input is obviously to proceed with the review proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Good morning. Good morning, Bill. I've got one question. Should an elector in a rural subdivision in North Rodney have guaranteed franchise to elect a minority of members to the Rodney Local Board, or should that elector receive a ballot paper to elect all members to the Rodney Local Board?
I think if you're talking about the rural subdivision, this is a situation where people can choose any of or all of the electors. I mean, these are also details that can be dealt with in responses to the review proposal. But essentially, the aim of this proposal is to get the maximum amount of representative basis for people's votes and choices.
Within a subdivision and not at large?
Within the subdivision, yes. So there's an at-large within a subdivision, as we have now, where there's more than one candidate within the subdivision, and we would persist with that approach.
Thank you. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thank you. Just 2 quick questions. So community of interest is really where the legal test is on ward boundaries. As a very regular visitor to Western Rodney, do you feel that Western Rodney shares communities of interest with Eastern Rodney?
I think it does in terms of the commonality of the guardianship from the Maori perspective. I mean, that's why we presented in front of the Representation Commission on the alignment of boundaries for the then proposed Helensville electorate, which is now Kaipara ki Maharangi, and the argument for alignment was well accepted, but the concept was that this is both East and West Kaipara. Kaipara and Maharangi have a common heritage, and it's appropriate for both of them to remain as part of that that heritage within the Rodney, but subdivided as we propose.
Thanks. Just a quick supplementary, if that's okay. Oh, I'm getting the glare. Oh, sorry, Mayor. Just quickly, Kumu is facing large intensification in the future. I just want your view on timing. Why should we do this now rather than wait for intensification to come and get a better picture of population?
Well, the first response to that is you can always wait for anything if you can put it off, and you don't have to make the decision now. But as I said, your responsibility to do something which is good for the people in terms of giving them democratic accountability through the whole representation process, which is the basis on which we elect our representatives, that should never be delayed. It should always be done when you can improve that and as quickly as possible. And the other reasons I've outlined for why there will be advantages to you from proceeding with this proposal right now when you're going through a period of unprecedented impact from the outcome of COVID and the response to it. And this really gives you an opportunity to let people exercise their one democratic right, which is to help you decide the best basis for their representation.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you. You've addressed the issue of why now, rather than waiting for 2025.
Yes.
But is there a groundswell of support for this? Can you speak to where the support for such a consultation is being generated from?
The short answer to that is there's never a groundswell of support for these things. As you know, the turnout for elections is generally low. We are hoping that by engaging the community through this proposal, particularly the rural communities, we'll get a better turnout in Rodney. And so no, there's no groundswell, there never is in the representation reviews. That's why you are tasked with the responsibility of proposing the appropriate structure and basis for representation, getting the feedback from people who care to comment, and then making the decision, ultimately with the Local Government Commission if necessary. So there's never a groundswell of support for these kind of changes. Most people don't either have the time or the understanding or the knowledge to even comment effectively on them until they've had the proposal presented, which is what the review process does.
Thank you. Councillor John Watson. Last question.
Thanks, Bill. Just a very quick question here, and just really goes to why this proposal was not raised earlier in the year when Council was looking at the options in February. Could you give a response to that?
Yeah, okay. The Representation Commission that we submitted to was only dealing with those issues at the end of 2019, and our submission to them was in February this year. Nobody ever considered the idea of having interest-based subdivision representation rather than place-based representation because nobody had ever thought of the idea. It's only come up in the context of our consideration following discussion about boundary changes, about alignment, and seeing the opportunities with the work that NZ Stats has done in creating these rural-urban distinctions, their own classification. People weren't aware of this, and it's never been a factor in the consideration before. So we're pleased to be able to get onto it as quickly as we can. And of course, in February, that was very early in the process.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sayers, I might ask you to move the motion to receive and to thank Bill and the Northern Action Group for their submission, seconded by Councillor John Watson. I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much, Bill, for your presentation and answering the questions.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Right, we come now to item number 7, which is local board input. We have had one request from the chair of the Rodney Local Board, Phelan Piri. And Phelan, I'll ask you to come to the table, and you're talking about the same issue, I think, item number 10 on the agenda. And you're more than familiar with the procedures around this table, so 5 minutes and then some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I won't take up a lot of time. Obviously, the board hasn't provided feedback on this because of the way that this is being done. So this is really, I came along to give councillors an opportunity to ask questions about some of the issues raised in the proposal around local board activities. And also, I'd probably just like to take the opportunity to point out that a number of the things raised in this process could be, in the proposal, could be dealt with by the governing body considering next year to allocating some money to the Unsealed Road Improvements Program, and also addressing the findings of the Local Government Commission on the proposal for North Rodney to break away. But really, I'm just here to answer any questions that councillors may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was brief and to the point. We have the first question from Councillor Linda Cooper and second from Angela Dalton.
Thanks for coming down, Phelan. I suppose my question is, if to understand what's being asked, if the proposal is to just have people representing more rural areas, some of the things that were commented on in the previous reviews, that a lot of rural people are accessing the local service town centres. So would this mean that then those people don't get to vote for people that live in those towns to be advocating to them for better services for the rural area when they're going to their service centre? You know, I mean, basically that's their lifeline, isn't it? I'm not sure if I'm quite putting that quite right, but it's really around, if you live in a rural area, your local towns are really important. And so there's still a necessity for people to be able to input to those people. It's not just a rural person that you need to advocate for your interests.
Yes, I guess the thing here is about rural settlements. So the difference between, you know, maybe what we call a village or a town. In the current subdivisions, you've got a range of villages which might have 1,000 to 2,000 people living in them in the sort of wider catchment, through to obviously places like Kimmy or Warkworth, which would have thousands of people living in them. The current subdivision boundaries are done on communities of interest, and everyone has to go into their nearest town to use the facilities there. But it's also misses the point that we as a board have to manage facilities across a wide range of areas. We've got a lot of rural halls that literally it's just the hall, and it's just surrounded by rural area. It's not necessarily got a township adjacent to it. So the personally not necessarily convinced that the recommendation would change anything that currently goes on in terms of the outcomes, but it would potentially mean that there was a lot more focus around the populations in those larger towns, and that's not necessarily, those community of interest around Kumia and Warkworth, those towns service a huge catchment, and those people wouldn't necessarily, like you say, have an ability to communicate with those elected members. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Thank you. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Well, my question was around the representation on the board and the decision making, because it seems there is a concern that there are not enough rural representatives on the board to make decisions to the rural areas. Specifically, perhaps if we talked about unsealed roads, the decision making is affected by the membership, or actually by the money you are given to do those roles, to do any projects.
Well, we don't make any decisions about unsealed roads. That's your role as governing body members to do that. We don't have control over the road maintenance budgets either. So those issues, changing subdivision boundaries makes no difference to those outcomes. The current board makeup is of 9 members. 8 of those live in rural areas. They don't live in urban townships. There's only 1 member that lives in a fully serviced urban township. So, and I mean that, to be honest, that makeup has been pretty consistent since 2010. So I think there is very strong rural representation, and the local board plans since 2010 have always included strong advocacy around rural issues as our number 1 priority. So I think that's been pretty consistent.
Thank you very much. Councillor, just pause for a moment. Chris Darby.
Fallon, thanks for coming in, and thank you to Councillor Sayers for triggering this inquiry, because it's a necessary inquiry. But look, I can't help think, Fallon, that maybe what Councillor Sayers has triggered here is symptomatic in a wider scope. And we're 10 years up on the Auckland legislation, and I'm aware that the incoming Minister of Local Government, the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta, has taken a briefing from her ministry people signalling a possible review of the governance arrangements for Auckland. And then there's the wider local government reforms that have been signalled. So I'm just wondering whether what Councillor Sayers has triggered could actually be caught in maybe our more active participation, rather than reacting to government, our active participation in a review of the governance arrangements, and just wanted to know your thoughts on that. Or am I off course?
If you look at the proposal, what's underlying there is a problem across Auckland with dissatisfaction around current governance arrangements and decision making of both the governing body and local board in terms of what control that we have over things like CCOs, and obviously transport's a big one. And you know, maybe after 10 years it is time to have a look at that and have a look at how the governance arrangements are done. I mean, we've just had a CCO review, and this week I've seen the sort of initial proposals around what's coming back to local boards in terms of how CCOs are going to engage with us. It's not going to change a lot of the underlying issues that the public and elected members have. So I do, we keep bumping up against legislation, and in effect this proposal is bumping up against legislation around when reviews can be done, communities of interest, but it's an underlying issue, and perhaps after a decade this is time to have a review of that and really seriously look at whether governance can be improved across Auckland. I personally think it can do, and some of the complaints that are in this proposal do touch on that, and I have sympathy for them.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Good morning, Phelan. Two quick questions from me. Would you agree that it would, for all intents and purposes, be extremely difficult to come up with a subdivision boundary which reflects a homogenous community of interest within the Rodney local board area, unless you're prepared to go significantly at variance from the population quota tolerance?
Well, Rodney already falls well outside that. We're quite exceptional, you know, a bit like Waiheke and Great Barrier, so we already fall outside that, and it is incredibly difficult. It's 46% of Auckland's land mass. Representation is difficult. It's spread over a large area, and yes, I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect answer, to be honest.
So the corollary to that would be that the best way, well, the bluntest way to eliminate significant variations to population quotas within a local board area is to remove subdivision boundaries and to have at-large elections.
Yes, that would be one solution. However, I suppose the risk, and this proposal sort of originating from Wellsford, is that potentially the population density is in the south of the ward, and therefore members could end up being elected from the south of the ward, leaving the northern parts of Rodney completely unrepresented, and I feel that would disenfranchise people further. So yes, I can see that there's an argument for that, but I'm not sure whether that addresses the proposal that you've got in front of you.
And just to confirm though, you said that 8 of the 9 members of the local board live in a rural setting.
They do, but they're spread over quite a large geographic area. So and I guess that's a feature of subdivisions, isn't it?
But presumably all those local board members would take an interest in all parts of the local board.
Well, they do. We're elected by subdivision, but we have to represent when we're sworn in. We're there to represent the entire ward.
Thank you. The last question from myself. Phelan, when you began your comments, you said the local board hadn't had a chance to consider this as a group. So I'm just wondering if you can give us a bit of a flavour for what you must have talked about this to other members of the Rodney local board, what the view of the wider board might be on this question.
Honestly, I can't. I have spoken to some members, but I can't offer. It'd be unfair of me to do that. I mean, I can just say personally, and having spoken to a few other members, we haven't heard. The first we heard of this sort of request, and was obviously when the notice of motion arrived. I haven't personally heard anyone in the area talking about this being a solution to our current problems.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd just like somebody to move, please, that we receive Councillor Dalton. Somebody to second. I've got to look to my right, Councillor Officer Collins, that we receive and thank the submission from Phelan Piri as chair of the local board. All those in favour, please say aye. You've already said it. To the contrary, no, carried. Thank you very much, Phelan, and can you pass on to the other board members our best wishes to them, our thanks for their hard work during the year.
Yes,
and,
I was just
have
going
a
to
Merry
say,
Christmas.
on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the Mayor and councillors for your work this year. It's been an incredibly difficult year, and I do feel this year the engagement with local boards has been fantastic. It feels like really great co-governance, so I want to thank you all for that. Thank you.
We're all keen to put the year of COVID-19 behind us. Thank you very much. We now come to item number 8, extraordinary items. I have had no indication of any extraordinary item being raised. And item number 9 is a notice of motion. We have received a notice of motion. Everybody has received that in good time from Councillor Greg Sayers, and that will be dealt with under item 10, which we will now move to. I thought possibly the best way of doing this, Councillor Sayers, is to get you to formally move the motion. We'll seek a seconder. You might like to speak to it, but I would also like our officers then to pass their comments following your introduction. But it is a notice of motion from you, and it's appropriate, I think, that you have the first bite of the cherry, particularly given this season. Right, so Councillor Sayers, do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor John Watson. Councillor Sayers, the floor is yours.
Mr Mayor, could I, once the officers have presented, do I get a right of reply at the end of that?
Yeah, as the mover of the notice of motion, you have a right of reply at the end of the debate.
Thank you, Mr.
That's the and you have the right to ask questions as well.
All right, thank you. There is a PowerPoint presentation that I think would be helpful. So today what's been presented in this notice of motion is that in February we looked at the electoral reviews processes and kind of locked ourselves into not doing anything until 2025 elections. What I'm asking today in the notice of motion is we revoke that decision and look at carrying out this Rodney subdivision boundary review in time for the 2022 elections. Mr Foster's given a general overview. He didn't have a lot of time. I'll elaborate on the model a little bit more for the members. But so today's request isn't necessarily about endorsing a model, it's endorsing going out for public consultation and getting that feedback. The Rodney Local Board area has very distinct rural and urban areas, and we have a duty of care to ensure that there is always fair, strong, balanced and equitable representation at all times. What this group has unearthed since February is a model based not on geographical area, as we see on the left, but more on communities of interest. The key consideration, I think, for us around the table today is whether there's sufficient grounds for the proposal to warrant undertaking such a review. Council can't undertake a partial review, would have to go out to all of Auckland to ask for input, and we may well get comments from other areas of Auckland as well about their areas of representation, and we'd have to duly consider those in the proper manner. So what that slide up there is showing is if you look up on the right-hand corner of the second slide, there's kind of the Warkworth sub-boundary. That includes Matakana, Lee, Algies, Warkworth. Now that's an area that you'll see is much tighter than the brown on the left-hand side. That area there has a structure plan in place for it. The boundaries more closely represent the actual urban parameters of that area. The structure plan's in there to take care of growth that's coming into that area, and that community up there is very focused on that growth and how they deal with that growth going forward. We go down to the pink area at Dairy Flat. Again, there's a structure plans in place for that community. They're having growth, industrial and residential coming into that district, so that community is very focused on the needs there. We go to the yellow, the Kimu. Again, that the proposed boundary more tightly aligns with the perimeter of the township in that area. That area does not have a structure plan in place. It has had 2,500 houses through special housing areas dumped in there with no thought to infrastructure, particularly around roading. So they have horrendous congestion of traffic, particularly along State Highway 16, and that community is very concerned about that, and they will be focusing as a community about how they deal with that, with no plans to deal with it for the next 10 years. Then you've got that large green area, which represents a rural area. About 50% of the rate take comes from the rural community. Those farmers may typically pay $50,000, $40,000, $20,000 a year in their rates, and their common interest is where's our value for money in that. We don't get footpaths, we don't get sewage, we don't get wastewater, we don't get fresh water. All we've got is an unsealed roading network that we'd like to have addressed. So that community tends to focus on that, and there's the commonality between the different, those different communities. So really what I see is this proposal really gives those townships tighter electoral representation to help focus on the needs of those areas. And so it's not just about the townships, it's also about the rural. And it's not just about the rural, it's also about representation in those townships. So this new idea that's been proposed is about giving each of those 4 areas with different common interests, areas of common interests, rather than a geographical based approach, more of a tighter, fairer and more equitable approach to their areas of concern. So if I go on to the next slide, Sandra, thank you. So what's been proposed in terms of, I'll start off by saying, just addressing the point that this is not about any type of criticism of local board performance, decision making or even funding mechanisms that are in place. This proposal is not about how much money the LTP would be putting into the roading networks. The total number of elected members remain at 9. They're just spread out differently, as you can see up there. And as you appreciate, and as the Chair, Phelan Perry, alluded to, once elected into office, those local board members try and govern collectively across the entire local board area. But what this does is really take home for those elected members their duties and responsibilities to those areas from where they come. So just to be clear, and I want to reinforce the point that was made in the presentation by Mr. Foster, that at the moment on that left-hand side, the quotas aren't being met. The new model on the right-hand side, and supported by the number crunching in the paper that you've been presented by the NAE group, complies. And I think that's a very important point to make. And addresses Councillor Darby's concerns, I think, around the proposal as well. There's 11% Māori across Rodney. Now, whether this eventuates or not, but you could say potentially Māori identify with rural more than they do with urban. And there would be a hope there that with 4 rural seats that candidates supported by iwi or individual candidates may well consider running for office. I would just say that the notice of motion was received by the Chief Executive on the 6th of November, and that was distributed on the same date to all local board members. So I know there have been a number of workshops and business meetings since then, but obviously this hasn't been discussed. But I think, as mentioned, there should be opportunity for the local board to contribute to this should it go out for public consultation. And just onto the last slide, if I may. This is the resolution that we actually all voted on back in February. I've just highlighted 3 points there. The electoral system circled there in C, that's something that we're not looking at today, but Councillor Darby has alluded and kind of supported by the Chair that maybe there's opportunity to do that. I'd be reluctant to move a motion around that to lose my speaking rights, but The F there is really, I just highlighted, we did identify that there was an opportunity to review representation, but then we went on to G and said we'd take no further action for the 2022 elections, and it's G that I'm looking to revoke. So just to conclude, there were a couple of papers sent around by the two local MPs for the area, but one from Labour, Maya Lubrick, and one from the National Party, Chris Pink, which is kind of unusual that they would unite in this. But what they were basically saying in the letters was we should take this opportunity to undertake a review and let the public have input. So I thank those Ministers of Parliament for doing that. And just to conclude, what I'm asking for is for us collectively to exercise our duty of care to go to the people of Rodney. At the heart of this is the people, not the elected representatives, to see if they believe that such a model gives them better representation for both the townships and for the rural areas. It's about expressing a democratic right to have a fair, balanced and equitable model in place for them now, and that's why we're saying the timing's now. Now we know about this, we should go out and execute our carer duty and go out to public consultation. I think I'll conclude there, Mr Mayor, other than to say when I first looked at this proposal, I saw advantages for the rural areas, and I saw advantages for the people of Rodney to actually have a say about how they would like their electoral representation presented, and I also saw an opportunity for us to get back into quota and meet the criteria rather than stay outside the boundaries. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. The way in which I intend to proceed now, I'd like to invite Rose Leonard and Warwick McNaughton to come to the table, please. Also to acknowledge that we have here Brian Osborne, our Senior Statistical Analyst at REMU, Leslie Jenkins, the Local Area Manager for Hibiscus and Bays, Rodney and Upper Harbour, and I think we have somebody here from Auckland Transport, is that correct? Maybe not. Okay. How I'd like to proceed is to get Warwick and Rose to provide a background, a context for the notice of motion. I'll then, I think, divide it up into having questions to our council officers and then a chance for comment. So, and at the end of that comment, Councillor Sayers, you'll have a right of reply. Warwick, I think you're leading off, or yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship and Councillors. In the advice that I distributed, the written advice, acknowledged the background paper, very thorough, very innovative, and as well as that, it achieves compliance with the 10% rule. So congratulations there. The key comment I was going to make was that it's not possible to conduct a partial review in the way the notice of motion is worded, but Councillor Sayers, I think, has accepted that. So I attached to my advice the full section 19.8H from the Local Electoral Act, which sets out everything that has to be determined. Essentially, a review is a review of all of the representation arrangements for the coming election. We cannot leave any matters undetermined, but in conducting a review, we might decide that all arrangements are status quo or only a few of the arrangements are changed. But they're all publicly notified and the public can submit on any aspect. And if there are any appeals, the Local Government Commission can consider and change any of the Council's proposals. At a minimum, we would need to address the current non-compliance with the 10% rule, which exists in the Rodney Ward and Howick local board subdivisions, and other issues may arise during consultation. So that's really just to say it's bigger than just deciding to review the Rodney local board subdivision boundaries. In terms of whether or not it's worth doing it now and then deferring the following review to 2028, there are signals from government that there will be legislative reform in the local government area during this term of Parliament. And so my guess is that you would want to do another review in 2025. And the final comment is just to make the observation, I'm not saying whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it hasn't been made already, is that one consequence of the proposed rural subdivision relates to the way population is spread. So approximately 70% of the population will be in the southern part of the rural subdivision and 30% in the top part. What that means for voters in the Wellsford area is that a good thing. They'll be able to elect 4 representatives, but the voting population is in the south, and those representatives will likely be determined by the voters in the south. And again, I'm saying that it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but I want to make that observation, and that's why we tend to look at place-based subdivisions to ensure there's an even geographical spread. At the moment, people in the Wellsford area have a guarantee that they can elect 1 person onto the board.
Thank you very much, Warwick. So we come now to questions. So we'll just, first of all, I'll start with Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mayor. Sorry, I haven't had much sleep courtesy of a 1-year-old, so I just need to check my understanding on this. Does this mean that passing this notice of motion would allow a review of other boundaries in different wards?
Oh, most definitely. That's what I'm saying. It's a full review.
And would that also include Māori wards, or is it specifically for geographic lines?
No, it doesn't include Māori wards. There's separate legislation around Māori wards. The cut-off date for that was 23rd of November last year. Sorry, this year.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Mine was just the wording. Councillor Henderson said allow. Is it more likely that it requires a full review if we do one ward?
We have to determine all the representation arrangements for the next elections.
If we open it up, everything.
Although we might end up deciding that we don't change very little.
Yes, but we'd have to go through the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions. I do. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you and good morning. My issue has actually probably been addressed by you, but the wording at C is a little unhelpful for me, because if we were to have a review, I would presume that we'd have to do a full options analysis, including within the Rodney Local Board area, which would consider options beyond the proposal put up by the Northern Action Group, wouldn't it? It would, all options would be on the table, including the option of election at large.
Yes, and it's been our practice in the past to get feedback from local boards, so any options that they might want to put on the table as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you. My question is around the resourcing to do it in terms of time. So the Joint Governance Working Party have an existing work plan, so with some hefty pieces of work in it. And I am wondering how much it will be compromised. You've got in the report that, as an example, the Code of Conduct would have to be deferred, which is worrying. There's other pieces of work, I would say, the review of the local board funding that we're currently going through. How long would this review take? When would you, if this was passed, when would you need to start the piece of work, and how long would it take?
Yes. The first public notification of the council's initial proposal would need to be about July, August. I think it was July last time we did it. The deadline is for the notification to be early September, I think. So we need a whole process in front of that to engage you people and local board people about potential changes and to get agreement on what ought to be the council's initial proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Warwick, I've become aware of a briefing note to the incoming minister that signals a review of, I think the words are governance arrangements in Auckland. Do you think there is greater potential, in respect to the mover of this motion, to actually do this more thoroughly and work with government, Auckland Council working with government, because I've signalled local government reforms generally, and I've specifically signalled a review of the Auckland legislation in that briefing note. Do you think there's scope to capture what Councillor Sayers is intending here, along with other matters that have come to our attention, and possibly things that we're not quite aware of. If we drew up a scope, we get the Chief Executive to come back with a scope of how to work with government on this.
Yeah, through the chair, I'm aware of various statements about looking at reforms of local government. So earlier on, there were intentions to modernise legislation around local elections, for example. There's moves for local elections to go to the Electoral Commission. In terms of the statement and the briefing to the incoming minister about Auckland governance, I took that to read as a response to the continuing submissions that we make to them to increase the number of councillors. At the moment, the legislation sets the number of councillors at 20. Every other council can include in their review of representation arrangements how many councillors to have. I'm also aware that LGNZ are starting to look at issues wider than just localism, but reform, but mainly around Three Waters and RMA. There are a number of reform pieces of work on the horizon that may well engage us next year.
Just a supplementary, if you don't mind, Mayor. A wise government, I'm not suggesting they're otherwise, wouldn't it be interested in legislative change that established Auckland and to look at it in review to help inform itself in the drafting of future legislation that might affect local government reorganisation in other parts of the country? Do you think they'd be, or was that far too generous of me to the Parliament?
Very soon after what's called the Super City was formed, there was a review undertaken by the Auditor General's Office, and then there was a further review sometime later, 5 years, undertaken by the Committee for Auckland, or sponsored by the Committee for Auckland. It was actually undertaken by Professor Ian Shirley. And there's possibly an argument for another review. I have heard various submissions and arguments for different sorts of review. I think one of the key requests at the moment is for review of funding opportunities.
Thank you very much. Just in clarification of that, there is in the briefing for the incoming minister from the Department of Internal Affairs the suggestion of a review of Auckland's governance arrangements. But I took that, I haven't read it firsthand, I've read it through the media, but I took that to be relatively limited in terms of removing the restriction on us that is imposed only on Auckland and not other councils for determining the size of our membership, which we all know was a barrier to even considering the creation of a Maori ward. And secondly, there would be changes that the Minister has signalled about making it easier to implement Maori wards without going to referendum. Was there anything, are you familiar with the briefing, was there anything that suggested the review of Auckland's governance arrangements would be wider than that? No. No. Okay, thank you. Last question, Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thanks, Your Worship. Warwick, what would be the cost of this if it was to be successful?
The cost of a review, look, it would, in dollar terms, it would be less than $100,000 probably. The bigger impact is really on staff time and resources. And as I've signalled, there's possibly a program of work coming through from central government that we might wish to engage on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We come now for comments. So those wishing to comment on the notice of motion, maybe Councillor John Watson, if you as the seconder, you'd like to comment on it at this point. And anybody else wishing to comment, please indicate to us that you'd like to talk to it.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for volunteering me to go first up. Appreciate that.
I had no other speaker on the list, John. You had to be it.
Well, yeah. So I guess just at the outset, I'd like to thank Councillor Sayers for bringing this matter to our attention, and particularly in in his and others' quest to try and ensure some sort of fair, strong, equitable representation that reflects the communities of interest. And I think it's very important to bear in mind how unique the Rodney ward is from other parts of Auckland, not just in terms of its size and its diversity of geography, but also in those communities of interest which a representation's meant to reflect. But what's perhaps not quite so apparent in that analysis of the rather unique features of Rodney is its political heritage, which is very much playing out now in a manner that's almost reflective of the last century. And that might not be immediately apparent to people that sit around this table, or indeed the organisation as a whole. For some of us who served on the Rodney District Council, it certainly is. It was first and foremost a consideration in terms of both how the council operated and how its communities regarded that council. And at its, probably at its height, this political heritage achieved kind of national infamy, really, in terms of the fact that it was dissolved. So in 2000, the Rodney District Council was dissolved, a commissioner was put in, and that was largely a consequence, despite being personal factors, but it was largely reflective of this urban-rural conflict or divide, or however you might like to frame it. Ironically enough, back then, and indeed in the years since then, it was the urban part of Rodney who felt they were getting the bum deal. So basically you had a situation where collectively the rural councillors outnumbered the Hibiscus Coast, the urban councillors, and they were not beyond using that to their advantage. The irony now is that while perhaps not cast in that same rural-urban conflict, and certainly nothing approaching some of the scenes that characterise the Rodney District Council, there is that feeling of discontent, of not getting a fair shake of the salve, or have a suck of the salve. I'm mixing up my metaphors there. And that's been around since the inception of the super city. We know that with the Northern Action Group, who have at various times attempted to break away, and they're doing that not in a vacuum. They're doing that reflecting some fairly heartfelt sentiments that become stronger the further north you go, north of the bridge, in fact. So the further you go up, at the level of dissatisfaction with what has emerged through the super city becomes stronger, and that's just a fact, and it's reflected in all our surveys that we do. And ironically enough, also at election time, where those very same communities often have a higher voter turnout. So these are people who are politically engaged. They do have basic expectations of how they should be represented and what they might reasonably expect from that representation. Now, at Rodney, it's very clear those expectations are not being met. Councillor Sayers, as the councillor on the ground, is very much aware of those, and it's to his credit that he's attempting to address that in a way that at least gives people the opportunity to consider doing things differently. Now, as was said at the outset, that might not well be adopted, that might be rejected categorically. But I think it's important in terms of that wider political context to give people the opportunity to feed into that, because this feeling of discontent, which is not reflective of individuals, as Councillor is saying, it's just what's been imposed, and I think it would be wise to give that opportunity as a very coherent submission that has been made to us. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with all parts of it, but I think it should be put out to the people who are better placed to make a more of an informed judgment as to how this might improve that situation. The alternative is to do nothing, and this discontent continues to fester, and that is in no one's interest. So I think Councillor Sayers' notice of motion provides a way forward, that a review of that subdivision boundaries might strike a sweet spot that goes towards perhaps addressing some of these inherent political dissatisfaction that exist and have been around for a while. So thank you, Mr Mayor, for that opportunity, and on that basis I'll be supporting the notice of motion.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Greg, for this work. It's interesting. I'm not saying it's perfect, and what this is about is not what the proposal is, but whether we go out for public input on it, which means we have to open up the can of worms for the whole city. And I was involved in the last one, and it is a substantial piece of work. It is heavy, intensive stuff to get through. It's not easy. So, Mr Mayor, I don't have a problem with what's been proposed here by the Northern Action Group. It's the timing that I think is difficult. It's already been mentioned twice today, and I'll say for the third time, I think it's important. There's a lot of uncertainty around what is going to be on the government's agenda for local government over the next 3 years. And that may well affect boundaries or representation levels. We need to wait and see what that occurs before we launch into something that may end up being redundant before it even gets started. So I suggest we follow our normal procedures and we wait to 2025 and instigate the review then in a thorough, timed manner with an allocated budget that does justice, and we do it for the whole of Auckland as we did last time, and made it rounded and balanced, because one ward is not an island unto itself. There are changes within those ward boundaries for subdivision, but there are also changes to ward boundaries drawn out by our experience of the last review. So not against the proposal, but Mr Mayor, I think it's all about the timing, so I will not be supporting.
Thank you. Councillor Pipacoon.
Tēnā koe e te koro matua, nā mihi nui ki a koutou e te kaupapa e tēnā wā. I was just going to vote against this, but I think I owe it to the Councillor Sayers, Mr Mayor, and those who've worked on this proposal, just to say a few words about why I won't be supporting this at this time. And I do want to acknowledge the work that's gone into it, but I do find the timing is very curious when we have a huge pipeline of work coming at us and for staff going into the LTP next year. And the way it will open up a review of all of the issues on local boards means that it would put a huge amount of work onto staff. And I just want to make a note that in terms of subdivisions, there's actually quite a strong argument to not have subdivisions at all on local boards. And for the Waitemata local board, we did have quite a strong, we had a number of submissions supporting a subdivision, say, for the city centre. But what we always said to our city centre residents is it's much better to have 7 people representing you than just 3 or 2. And so we always had a kaupapa that we were all there to represent all of the constituents of our local board area. So for that reason, the main reason that I won't be supporting this is the timing, the resources that will be involved, and I'm worried too that it'll probably tip Warwick into thinking of an early retirement, and we don't want to lose him if suddenly felt that this was going to be put on top of him as well. And we've also got, we don't know what's going to be coming from government, and that's probably going to put even more pressure on us. So thank you for the opportunity just to say a few words about why I won't be supporting this. But kia ora, and thank you, Councillor Sayers, for the work that's gone into this, the thinking behind it. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. Councillor Christabi.
I've got an amendment by addition, Mayor, and I think the staff have just been conferring on it. So maybe you go to the next question or speaker, and then we'll come back to it.
Okay, let me just check. I've seen a copy of your amendment. It's not specifically on the topic, but it's wider than that. I think maybe I will take another speaker and then come back to you on that. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So I just want to speak in support of this. I think that what the community has come up with and what Councillor Sayers backs is well reasoned, and there's some analysis based on criteria particularly that go to community of interest. For my sins, I was a Rodney councillor for 10 years. I got elected immediately after the suspension, and like Councillor Watson, I was intimately familiar with it was actually the suspension of the council that happened at the time, and the reasoning behind that, and certainly Councillor Watson is right, it was because once you had the rural councillors and the Hibiscus Coast councillors in the same room without any division of responsibility, authority or accountability, it just didn't work. But just dealing with some of the issues here, as far as timing is concerned, I would suggest that far from the timing being poor, the timing is actually good, because it's not so far after the previous review when we looked at all of Auckland. So there's a strong argument, and I think Warwick would agree with me, that we don't actually have to visit many of the arguments that go to all of Auckland, the balance of Auckland, because they've been very recently traversed. But what we can do, and I'm sure the office time will be strongly focused, is in dealing on the matters before us as it goes to Rodney. For those of you that aren't familiar with the geography of the area, when I as a councillor had to travel from one part of Rodney to another, distant points, it might take me more than 2 hours driving time. Can you imagine that? Particularly if you had some congestion. I mean, it's 46% of the region, but not only that, it's incredibly disparate, separated. What this proposal does do, if you have a look at it and apply a perhaps a conflict lens over it, it means that the community of interest, particularly amongst the rural parts of Rodney, will tend to coalesce, because that big green area on the second map that Councillor Sayers presented covers most of that area, and it will give more effective representation to those rural parts of Rodney. And what may not be obvious to councillors that are in areas where you've got leisure centres and lots of community facilities and libraries and so on, if you look at this very large part of the region, many of those locations don't have any of those facilities. They don't even have sealed roads and the like. They don't have sewage. They don't have water. Obviously, people are still happy, but they're quite different. So I think that this proposal also has merit because it binds those communities together in rather a strong community of interest. So I think it's got real merit. I think the other comment that I'd make that we do have to consider going forward, and we don't do that sufficiently, is around the civic presence in parts of Auckland that are gradually losing it. And we need to revisit that, and this in part goes some way to doing that, because as Councillor Sayers and Councillor Watson have indicated, there are parts of Auckland that increasingly feel disenfranchised because of the emphasis on the centre rather than the emphasis on the parts, and the very strong history that this area has. So, in passing, I support this. I think that we owe it to the community. I don't think the costs are going to be great. I think that we can handle it strategically from a processing perspective.
Thank you very much. My suggestion is, after consulting on Councillor Darby's amendment, that we finish the discussion on the matter relating to Rodney Local Board, because this doesn't, it's much wider. But before we vote on the notice of motion, Councillor Darby might like to move this. While it's an amendment, it doesn't relate specifically to Rodney. So I kind of don't want to divert the debate off Rodney and then go back to Rodney. So, Councillor, if you're happy with that, we'll finish the debate on Rodney and then you can raise your notice of motion. I'm told we'd deal with it as a separate motion. I wasn't aware that you could do that, but I'm advised that you can. It's a surprise to me as well, but I'd rather do that. I'd rather just finish the debate on Rodney before dealing with this other matter. My advice is that we can deal with it as a separate motion. I'm not sure how that fits into standing orders, but I'm told that it does. And I'd just like to finish up the debate on Rodney specifically. So if that's okay with you, Councillor?
Yeah, look, just to be clear, it can be moved by amendment, by addition, or a separate motion, and I have conferred with Councillor Sayers on this because I don't want to weaken the emphasis on the notice of motion. So I'd actually like to take a lead from Councillor Sayers. If you don't mind, Councillor Sayers, would you like it by amendment, by addition, or do you want it as a separate motion afterwards?
My view is that it's quite separate from Rodney, and it's a different debate. And so I'm not wanting to close down the debate. Apparently you can have that debate, but I'd rather deal with Rodney in its own right first.
Point of order. Point of order, Mayor.
Point of order, Councillor Henderson.
Just in terms of 1.5.7 standing orders, amendments need to be relevant and not direct negatives. It must be relevant to the motion under discussion. So can I just seek a ruling on how relevant it is to the motion?
It might help if I read the motion. It's not a direct negative, but it is separate. You could say we're looking at reviewing one aspect, but actually we should review a much wider aspect. The motion from Councillor Darby is that the Chief Executive report back to the governing body in Q1 2021 on local government reforms signalled by government and scope to undertake a shared Auckland Council with government review of the decade-old legislation establishing Auckland Council, the Local Government Auckland Council Act 2009, that might inform local government reforms and refinements to the Auckland Council Act. What I have, so that's the motion. I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to talk to Councillor Darby about that. It might be wise, before we do that, to find out exactly what is in the Minister's mind on what she intends to move and what she intends to put in the legislation. So if you were in agreement with it, I'm very happy to write to her, ring her, or otherwise communicate to say what is in this, and then this motion may be relevant if it is intended to be a wider one. If it's not intended to be a wider review, you might want to move at a particular point in time that we have a wider review, and we could do it then. I didn't know that there was an urgency about this, and it would be helpful to the debate on it to find out what the Minister was actually intending. But Councillor Darby, you might like to just respond to that suggestion.
Well, I need to be mindful of the standing orders. And Councillor Casey, I'd like you to withdraw the snoring, snorting noise. Yeah. That's the very behaviour that Councillor Hills highlighted publicly yesterday. Oh, no. It's not okay.
Hang on, look, I'm sorry, I'd rather not be...
I do take offence to that, members. Yeah. It is not at the scale of what Councillor Hills is referring to, but it's all part of that. It's not on.
I didn't hear what was alleged of the councillor, and she's not at the table now. So can I just ask you to refer to the suggestion that I've made to you, councillor, please?
What I'm referring to here is...
Point of order, Your Worship.
Point of order, Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, in regards to standing orders and the relevancy that Councillor Henderson mentioned, do you have the decision-making to not allow this particular amendment because of its relevancy, because the relevancy itself has nothing to do with the notice of motion that we are discussing? My understanding of standing orders is that you as chair can refuse to accept this. So I just need a decision on that, please.
Mayor, I've actually
just answered the point of order.
And it is relevant.
Okay, Councillor Darby.
Councillor Darby, it's the point of order.
Were you wanting to speak to the point of order, Councillor Darby?
No, you can't speak to a point of order.
The answer to your point of order, councillor, is yes, I can rule it out of order. I'm trying to do this by agreement rather than by fiat from the chair. So, Councillor Darby, if I can get you just to come back to the question of whether you'd be willing to hold off on this until I can get clarification from the Minister as to what she's intending to do in the review of governance of Auckland Council.
Look, I've discussed this with Councillor Sayers, and I've also, it was triggered by a conversation a day that Councillor Dalton and I had yesterday, and Councillor Dalton is willing to second it. I do think it is entirely relevant because there is a broader review that the government has signalled, and I think that is an opportunity to capture the very things that Councillor Sayers has signalled here today. And I would be concerned that, because I'm getting a sense that there may not be a majority for Councillor Sayers' notice of motion to have the merit of what he's raising be entirely lost. The government has signalled in a briefing paper I've only just seen this morning that it intends to undertake local government reforms and review of the governance arrangements for Auckland. And yourself, Your Worship, you said in a recent media article, whole of council review would happen in due course. Let's be at the lead of that and have our chief executive do that work. And by all means, Mayor, you write to the minister, but it's the chief executive that works for us responding to resolution. And what I'm proposing is that we do some comprehensive work. It's 10 years, it's our birthday. Are we good? Are we bad? Have we succeeded? Not. How might that inform government's reforms? And the motion just asks the chief executives to start scoping things up, bring it back. It's entirely relevant to today. That's my explanation, not my speaking to.
Well, look, I'll make a ruling on it, and I'll rule that I won't accept the amendment because I don't think it's time-bound, councillor. I understand that what you're asking for is a legitimate question, but I'd like, when we have the debate on this, to have the information first and foremost as to what the Minister is intending to do before we write to her asking for something that might be quite different from what she intends to do. There will be a chance to debate this in the future, but this I regard as a separate matter from the focus that we are trying to put on to the representation in the Rodney ward. So I'll rule in that direction.
Can you give me the reason for ruling it out, please? And we have that reason recorded, please?
Yes, I just have. This is not a time-bound amendment. We do have time to reconsider it, but we should reconsider it in the context of having the information we need as to what the Minister is intending to do, and that this motion is not integral and it's very marginal to the specific focus of the notice of motion in Councillor Sayers, the Councillor Sayers has put forward. That's the reason.
Is that the advice of the governance side of the council?
That's my advice, and it's my right to make that ruling.
Okay. Okay, look, I'll bring it as a notice of motion at the next governing body meeting because it was a request for the chief executive.
Councillor, you're entitled to do that, but we're not going to debate it now. Thank you very much. Councillor Chris, sorry. We are actually in the. Okay, look, I'm going to go through my speaking list now. So, Councillor Fletcher, it's your call.
Thank you, Your Worship. When Councillor Sayers asked me what I thought of his notice of motion, I went back and reviewed much of the work that we undertook at the time of the governance review, which you will see I voted against sections of it because I thought that the review we did at the time did a disservice to Auckland in that it was insufficiently adequate to address the failure within the Auckland amalgamation legislation. And while we spend a lot of time on the second floor of the town hall here, I know that there is a sense of dissatisfaction on some aspects of the legislation that we work from. Our speaker earlier today sort of spoke eloquently about, well, why not now? And and it is, for me, a question of, if not now, why not? I think Auckland could be so much better. And we were grappling with frustrations amongst ourselves quite recently. And I think that so much of that is actually driven from the statute under which we work. And more refinement on that could create a much more workable Auckland. And after any major reform, you always go back and have a review and do some fine tuning. And that is why I recorded my dissent. That, at the time I think I was a bit cheeky in the way that I put it. I likened it to turkeys and Christmas, which seems entirely appropriate today. But for all of those reasons, and I am a bit disappointed, but I welcome the fact that Councillor Darby has foreshadowed that he will be bringing forward a notice of motion. I do think, with the arguments that have been put forward today by Councillor Sayers, quite compellingly, I will be supporting this notice of motion and will look forward to the notice of motion that is going to be brought forward by Councillor Darby. Auckland can do better, and we need to be leading government on what we want rather than waiting to be led and then being frustrated with the outcomes that we have. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby, you have a call. Do you wish to take the call on the motion?
Not right now,
in front of
thanks.
us? Right. So the last call is Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I too would like to foreshadow to Councillor Darby when that draft notice of motion is prepared. Very happy to support that because I think that it is relevant to this conversation, given that the matter that has been proposed here by Councillor Sayers, if passed, triggers a representation review, which I think is actually quite fundamental and would be captured by what I think Councillor Darby is attempting to achieve here as part of a broader conversation about our governance arrangements. I did want to raise a question, but the time for questions has passed. But my question to Councillor Sayers actually is in relation to the wording in C, because understanding the intent of what the notice of motion would require, the outcome, if it is adopted, would be a requirement to have a broader representation review, including a representation review of the Rodney Local Board governance arrangements, and that would not exclude options beyond what has been proposed by the Northern Action Group. Now, I don't support what the Northern Action Group has proposed in terms of a refinement to subdivision boundaries. I do support a review, but then I want to consider other options, including the option of a Rodney at-large election in the Rodney Local Board area. The issue that I have if I vote for C is that I feel that even though, if passed, C is not going to limit us to that outcome, it would reflect my support for C, and actually I don't support changes only to subdivision boundaries as per the submission. So I wondered if the mover of the notice of motion would be prepared to amend C simply to reflect the fact that agree to a review of the Rodney Local Board representation arrangements for the 2022 elections, full stop. Because if that were the case, then I'm very, very comfortable with C. To me, I would say to the mover of the notice of motion that the fundamental problem that I have with the subdivision boundaries is the fact that it's very hard to address the issues of communities of interest as well as ensuring one vote, one value. And the only way, in my view, to address the one vote, one value issue is to remove subdivision boundaries full stop. And I would consider that not just for Rodney Local Board, but I consider the removal of subdivision boundaries within all local board areas. because I think that is, I think that the subdivision boundaries in Rodney are a bit of a country quota, and I understand the argument behind the subdivisions that were proposed in other areas of Auckland when the Auckland Council was established in 2009, 2010. But I think times have changed, and I think the representation arrangements ought to reflect that. The chair of the Rodney Local Board has identified that members elected to the Rodney Local Board are interested and concerned and are stewards for all parts of Rodney, as they should be. They're not elected to just be a representative for that area. They're elected to be representatives of the Rodney community, and they vote on all matters relating to that community. Actually, it's an argument for considering issues such as whether we should have ward boundaries or whether we should have councils elected at large. So I'm happy to have this review, but I'm not happy with the being locked into just the issue that has been proposed, the solution that has been proposed in C. So maybe in the right of reply, the mover of the notice of motion might want to reflect on that, because if we have this, we will go wider than just this proposal, which is the appropriate thing to do. I would imagine that we would confirm within the Auckland region for the moment, actually the representation for the existing wards and local board areas would remain the same, but with the likely exception being Rodney and I suspect Howick, and that we would need to have a broad consideration of these matters, and then it would come back for debate, because I'm sure we'd have objections, and then we can resolve a proposal for the Local Government Commission, which we did last time, which I think was pretty thorough. We addressed some pretty controversial issues last time. You remember, Your Worship? I mean, I remember a proposal to split a ward, but we can address these matters, but I would like some consideration by the mover of the notice of motion, because I don't want to vote to reflect the wording in C at the moment, which actually I specifically oppose, but I am happy to support a review, which would be triggered if we were to pass this notice of motion today.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Sayers might like to consider that before his right of reply. Councillor Darby, you were wanting to take the call.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I do want to acknowledge Councillor Sayers for taking the lead and actually representing what he's picking up from his community as a significant issue. And I think the lead is what I'd like to emphasise here, Councillor Sayers. Having said that, I won't be mealy-mouthed with you, Councillor Sayers. I can't support this in isolation because there are knock-on effects, and I think you know those occur. So that's why I was working with you on a more holistic understanding of things all Auckland. That the government has signalled, but look, I've covered that, and that's been knocked out by the Mayor, but I have heard quite a lot of interest in that, so I do signal my notice of motion, and while Councillor Dalton and I might just put our names to that, I think I'll circulate that and give every member around this table the opportunity to have their notice of motion on a wider review, even though it might have Councillor Dalton and my name as the mover and seconder. But I'll go into that another time. But Councillor Sayers, what you've done here today is you've helped trigger probably a discussion that we should have had some time ago, that inquiry as to how good has the legislation been for Auckland. And while we might laud ourselves with all the highlights, we probably don't honestly or haven't honestly gone back to the Royal Commission work and looked at the two systemic problems that were identified: lack of regional integration, community engagement being poor. And I think the crux of your issue is actually likely, the inquiry needs to be undertaken, is about community engagement. It's about representation. And so that distills down to the depth and meaningfulness of our community engagement. And that is one of the key systemic issues that Justice Salmon identified more than 10 years ago. So thank you for triggering this. and I think we can start this journey now together, and your influence from Rodney can reach right across Auckland as we maybe work with government in a shared way, not just be led by them, that we work with them to review the legislation and have a better, improved governance structure for the whole of Auckland going forward. And they can also learn from Auckland's successes or otherwise to help inform their legislation as it applies to local government reforms around the country.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I have no other calls, so I'm going to take a call and then ask Councillor Sayers to have his right of reply. Firstly, I just want to address the question that the last speaker has raised. A wider review of our governance structures is an important issue. And if we were to make that decision, which is a valid decision to make if we choose to do so, we should make that decision in its own right, not as a tag-on to a specific issue that we're dealing with today, which is Rodney. If we make that decision, of course, that would involve, I think, Mr. Chief Executive, quite an enormous amount of resources. We've just got to think of what the CCO review, which was an effective review and one that I initiated, we know that took a lot of resources. It may be that we want to go in that direction, but if we want to go in that direction, we won't do it as a tag-on to another motion. We'll do it in its own right with proper consideration and facts in front of us, including what the Minister herself is intending in her review. That's not to say that we can't go for a review, but if it's in her mind that she doesn't want to do a review of that nature, we can do a review ourselves, perfectly within our capability. So it's not a case of needing their permission. We can do it, and we can do it independently. And I'd actually rather do it independently than do it with the government deciding whether or not we should be structurally reviewed. This is our decision to make about our future, not the government's decision. Can I come back to Councillor Sayers' resolution? And I want to thank him for raising it on behalf of the Northern Action Group, and I want to thank him for giving us due notice so that we all had a chance to think about this, and our officers had a chance to present a case. And his recommendations, his notice of motion, does raise a really interesting issue, and that is, what is a community of interest? Because it's not defined. It's not defined, actually, I think, even for electorates at central government level, and it's an amorphous sort of thing. I live in a ward very similar to Councillor Sayers. I'm just not sure whether Ardmore would want to be lumped in with the Awhitu Peninsula because we're both rural and create a very large area, and whether our community of interest isn't in fact with Clevedon because that's the local the town centre for us. My feeling is probably we've worked on the basis of a place-based definition of community of interest, and I would need to be convinced that we should move away from that, and I'm not at this moment convinced. But there are other things, and the things raised by our officers. We just had a review back in February, and we passed a resolution, I think maybe it was unanimous, I don't know, that we don't take further action. Sorry, it was overwhelming rather than unanimous. And I really think that the advice that we've been given, that you can't limit the review if it takes place. You can't do a partial review because anybody across our whole electorate can say, actually, if you're having a review of representation, I want this for Howick because we've exceeded the margin, the plus or minus 10% size or whatever. So I think if we are going to have a review, we would have to be prepared to have a review that covered much wider issues, and I'm not sure why we would do that within a year of deciding we didn't need a review. It could well be that we have to have a review because other changes external to this council are taking place, and that includes the Minister's indication and the Department of Internal Affairs indication that the way in which we are limited in the size of our representation contrary to everywhere else in the country, should be changed, and there may be changes in Maori representation. I think if we're going to have a review, I don't want to have one review that we decided earlier this year, another review on this issue, and then a further review next year or the year after. Let's see what comes out of what the government is proposing on those specific issues they've talked about, and then it may well be that we bring forward our review, but we do it all together. I think those are probably the major arguments. I respect the right of the local councillor to raise this recommendation. I acknowledge the presentation that we had both from the representative from the Northern Action Group, but also from the chair of the local board. And I have received correspondence, I think everybody's received correspondence, that suggests that this is not an idea that is universally applauded. I don't know where the balance of views are on it, but I think probably I've had 4 letters, and other councillors will have, from members of the Rodney local board and from groups such as Snell's Beach, and it suggests that this may not be something that the ward is unanimously looking for, but it's a matter of contention between different groups with different interests. So at this point, my approach will be not to support the recommendation, with due respect to the local ward councillor, for the reasons that I've set out. But I'd now like to pass to Councillor Greg Sayers the right of reply. Thank you, Councillor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and thank you for your comments. I would like to reflect on comments from Councillor Darby and also from Councillor Newman in my reply. Obviously, the Mayor's made his ruling, Councillor Darby. I couldn't add your recommendation on my amendment. I understand you had a second. I didn't want to lose this right of reply. I hope you understand that, but I'm pleased you've foreshadowed your notice of motion and duly noted by myself. In terms of Councillor Newman, yes, look, if I'll put this to the division, so I'm happy to end the C after the words 2022 elections. My understanding that probably gives you some flexibility in terms of what you'd like to present at that opportunity, but it doesn't exclude what's been presented today. So if I could do that with the indulgence of my seconder. Yeah.
Just on a point of order, Councillor, that has to be, obviously your seconder has to agree, but it has to be with the agreement of the meeting as a whole too. It doesn't have to be unanimous, but if there is a call for a division on that change, I would have to accept it.
All right, okay. Well, I don't know who makes that call, but I'm happy to make the change, Mr Mayor.
Maybe I just clarify this matter now. I'm sorry to interrupt your right of reply. Is there anybody that is opposed to or would wish to have a division on the change that's been foreshadowed by the mover of the amendment? Well, we'll make that amendment accordingly. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, well done, Mr Chair.
Just asked if you wanted a division. You didn't ask to vote. You didn't ask for the agreement. My understanding, for the agreement to the change. You just said, did we want a division on it?
It doesn't have to be unanimous, but if somebody wanted to have a vote on it, the decision by the majority of the councillors would prevail.
Sorry, I didn't hear you put the vote.
No, I didn't, because I asked if anybody had any problem with the amendment.
No, I do, and all I heard you say is, do you want a division, which I didn't, but...
Okay, so. No, that's fine. I was just trying to get a sense of whether there was a majority of people against it. I'd rather not have a division if we don't need it. So I understand.
That's all.
Yep, no, that's fine. So some people will be opposed, but nobody has asked for it to be put to the vote. So that amendment will be made accordingly. Thank you, Councillor. Please resume your right of reply, and sorry to interrupting.
No, that's quite all right, Your Worship. That's due process and correct procedure, so I thank you for that. I do want to compliment our officers, Warwick McMorton, supported by Rose, in terms of the response that they've given to the paper and the way they've professionally presented their thoughts to us as the governing body. So thank you very much, Warwick and Rose, for that. I think that was helpful, and in many ways complementary, I think, to the efforts and the innovation, I think the word that you used around the proposal. I do want to acknowledge the work that was put in by the Northern Action Group. I think we've all read the paper. There's a lot of technical effort that's gone into it. So to Mr. Bill Foster, well done, sir. Quite an incredible effort, and I've been proud to support this notice of motion. I also want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for accepting the notice of motion through your Chief Executive. Also want to thank the effort made by the local board chair, Phelan Perry, to come down here and make comment to us to help us in our decision making. Also want to thank all the councillors around this table for the questions and comments, ladies and gentlemen, that you've made today in this debate. In my presentation, I tried to explain, I appreciate your point, Mr. Mayor, about what is a community of interest. So that's why I went to a little bit of trouble to explain how I saw it for the Rodney local board areas by going through those different subdivisions of Warkworth, Dairy Flat, Kimu and the rural area. Now, I am going to ask for support in getting this resolution passed, probably through a division. Because I think we actually have, having listened to the debate, each of us has to decide, one, is there merit in the ideology? Is there merit in going to the public to get feedback? It could be rejection or it could be modification of the proposal. But as the governors of Auckland, I believe we have that duty of care to do that. And therefore, that's why I'm asking you for your support today. It's expressing the democratic rights of people, both in townships and in the rural areas, to exercise their democratic right to have the fairest, the most balanced, and the most equitable model of political representation in place for them as soon as possible. And that's where I probably disagree with some of the counter debate to this motion today. We should not be delaying. We should be getting on to give those people the fairness, the balance, and the equity that we so often talk around this table. Well, today is a chance to make a difference. Why not in February? I think we've had that answered. The idea wasn't formulated in February by this group, and that's why it's been presented to you today. Embracing the opportunity to do is that 1 minute?
5 minutes. Yeah, take another minute to round off. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you. This is about taking the opportunity to honour the people of Rodney. I think this is hard to vote against. It's good ideology. It's like the LTP. No decision's been made today, but we seem quite happy to go out in the LTP and consult on it. Well, what I'm asking for you is to do the same today. I don't believe we can wait any longer, and that we have a duty to act now, Your Worship. So in closing, I would just ask that this is presented by division. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Just because it's a day of complications, apparently, I've been advised that the amendment to C would leave a resolution that is beyond our power to move, and I'm going to ask for comment on that from our lawyers, so that the advice that I've just received, I'm sorry, I have just received it, is that we either go with the original proposition or we rule out C altogether. But can I get you to speak to that, please?
Thank you. Through the Chair. So the advice that Warwick provided to the members was that in order to undertake a review, it would need to be a full representation review. So C would need to be agreed to review as part of a full representation review, the subdivision boundaries of the Rodney local board area for the 2022 elections.
So just to seek clarification of that, is the original C also out of order?
Yes.
Okay. We Okay, it's better to have the advice late than not to have it at all. Thank you. So you'll all see the dilemma that this creates, including Councillor Sayers. What we'd be effectively voting on is A and B, but we don't have a C, and I'd have to say that perhaps we should have got the advice much earlier, before the debate began, that that C in its original form was not in order either. But that is the advice that we have now received. Warwick, would you like to add anything to that?
Just a suggestion to change, a minor change to the wording. Take out the word only. Agree to review and resolve changes to the subdivision boundaries of the Rodney Local Board area for the 2022 elections as part of a review of representation arrangements.
Okay, I'm going to have to check with the. I'll come to you in just a moment, Councillor Newman. I'll have to check with the mover and the seconder that they're happy to do that. I presume they are, rather than lose it. But you have a question also, Councillor Newman.
Yes, I do. A question to the officer, because I support the review and I'm undecided on the resolution of changes. So I would assume that we would need to agree a review of the subdivision boundaries for the Rodney Local Board area for the 2022 elections, but there's no requirement as part of this resolution to resolve changes today, is there? That would simply be a matter for the review, which would require the consultation and future deliberation before an agreement by the governing body to put that proposal to the Local Government Commission.
It would make it clearer if we actually took out the words relating to resolve, so that there isn't a resolution right now to make a change. Agree to review changes to the subdivision boundaries of the Rodney Local Board area for the 2022 election as part of a wider review of representation arrangements.
Okay, now I want to put that up before everybody has is asked to vote on it. You've asked for a division too, Councillor, but are you and your seconder in agreement with the changes recommended by our officers?
Well, I am, Mr Chair. If we could just see the wording up there so we could all just digest it.
Okay, we'll put it up, but maybe you can just repeat that again, Warwick, so everybody can absorb what the change is.
Agree to review changes to the subdivision boundaries of the Rodney Local Board area for the 2022 elections as part of a wider review of representation arrangements.
Okay, is everybody ready? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cooper.
I had a question.
A question, Councillor Cooper.
And if you don't mind, it's to you, Warwick. Right at the beginning of the questions, I asked you if doing just Rodney would trigger a review of all subdivisions in the whole region, and it would require it. Is that, and you said yes. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry for any confusion. I did try to start off by saying it's not possible to do a partial review.
That's right. So we knew that right at the beginning. So the other question you were asked before, which is really critical for me, is we didn't have time to do this by August when it would be needed.
In terms of timing, I set out in the memo the process we used last time. We started from memory about February, worked through the Joint Governance Working Party, looking at the different proposals and changes that could be made, went out to local boards and reported all of that back by July. It would be quite constrained, I think, but it's possible.
Okay, I think we've got at least some clarity, and I'm sorry that it's come late, that what we'd then be voting on, and as agreed by the mover and the seconder, is that you would do the review of Rodney for the 2022 elections, but it would be as part of a wider review of representation arrangements. So this would be another full-blown review. Okay, so I think, not sure whether that will change people's views on it, but I'm going to ask officers now to put this to a vote by division, please.
Councillors, you're voting on the motion as you see it on screen. Mayor Goff.
Sorry, the division is on A, B and C, or is it A, B and C separately?
No, it's, there's no request to have divided the resolution. You're voting on A, B and C. They all run together.
Okay, can we have a division on the A and the B then? Because one is a noting motion.
Just a point of order, could I just, Your Worship, we had already started that process, so just for clarity, please, we'd already started, so do we not now need to continue on A, B and C? Because we had already started.
Councillor, you're quite right. The process has begun, and I think A is noting, so if you took it separately, why would anybody vote against it? What you're actually voting on is the B and C, but they all run together. So I think we'll go back to holding the division and ask officers to recommence the vote on the division.
Mayor Goff.
No.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Coombe.
Against.
Councillor Cooper. Against. Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
Against, but record support for A and B, please.
Councillor Filipaina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher. For. Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
Against.
Councillor Mulholland.
Against.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
Against.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Young.
For.
So that is lost 7 votes to 12.
So I declare the notice of motion lost by 7 votes to 12. Right. It's 11:55. I think we'll see if we can continue to make progress, unless you feel a desperate need to have a cup of tea. Let's deal with item number 11, the Auckland War Memorial Museum Q1 report. And if I could ask Edward Siddle
Your Worship, just point of clarification. When is it your intention, I would like to use the bathroom, when is it your intention to take a very brief break?
I just needed an indication of that, Councillor. We'll call a 5-minute break and then resume. Please, if we can make it in 5 minutes, that's at 12:01 precisely. Thank you. Councillors, if you can resume your seats, please. Okay. I've been generous with the 5 minutes. I'll just make sure I've got just before I've got Ed Siddle at the table. Thank you, Ed, for item number 11. But just to advise councillors of something that may be of interest to you, the government has, in the last minute, put out a statement regarding Ihumātao. I haven't read the direct press statement yet, but what the statement does is indicate that they are purchasing the land at Ihumātao off Fletcher Residential for something just over $29 million, and that this is as a result of the direct discussions between the Crown and the Kingitanga representing the mana whenua. We have not been part of that negotiation. We were originally involved. It does not involve any financial commitment on the part of Council, but clearly it is a step towards the resolution of that issue. And we are a party to a memorandum of understanding, and we have an observer status at the meetings that will take place, as is appropriate for Auckland Council, because this is part of our rohe as well. And I just want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of work that's gone into that, and that the appropriate way to resolve this was between the Crown and mana whenua, and that is what has happened. Phil, Jim, I think you have put a memo out, or about to put a memo out to all councillors, just outlining a little bit of the background to that. Is there anything that you want to add to my comments?
Oh, no, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think, as you've said, it's been a long process to get to this point, and one that the council's been very supportive of. We do have a continuing observer role, and obviously we'll carry out that role. But it's an excellent conclusion.
Thank you very much. That Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Worship. Just a point of clarification. Have we formally resolved as a council to withdraw the SHA? Is that required, or does the work that is being undertaken by government at this point then supersede that?
I don't know the answer to that. If it's required, we'll do it, obviously, but we can come back to you on that.
I would formally like to request that we do have an opinion on that, because I would like to see it revoked so that it's quite clear that we do not support special housing on that area. That's a fair point. It is absolutely, it's not even implicit, it's explicit in the government's decision that the effect of the special housing area will no longer apply. That's why they've purchased the land. But I can find out what the legal formalities are for you via maybe Phil Wilson. Phil, you're here. I don't know whether you want to add to that, or whether you want to find out exactly. It's a matter of process rather than what the outcome will be. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. We'll clarify in detail following this, but I think it is important to record that the agreement doesn't prohibit some housing development in some form on that land. Okay, but I think it's best that we clarify outside of this forum with in consultation with government.
I would really appreciate that information, because there were obviously historical matters, but environmental assessments. There was a lot of work that was not undertaken by council before we embarked on an SHA, and I would really like to understand what the implications will be for moving forward.
I think, just to clarify Phil's point, as part of the discussions between Crown and Mana Whenua, the concept of papakainga housing has always been as part of those discussions. Councillor Filipaina.
Your Worship, I just wanted to make a clarification in regards to any of the reports and reports that actually went through this whole process. Was that Mana Whenua, and that was Te Akatai Waiuhua, and also Te Kawarawamaki, presented to this council all the environmental issues, that wahi tapu, it was all presented to council. Just wanted to outline that, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Anyway, look, I think that it's appropriate that before Christmas that this matter has finally been resolved, and resolved, I think, in a positive way. And this is not a decision that adds a burden to the Auckland ratepayers. So I think we'll all be pleased about that one as well. Okay, we come to item number 11 on the agenda, and this is the Auckland War Memorial Museum Quarter 1 report. You should have received by email just a further, it's the email that I sent to the chair of the board of the Auckland Museum Trust, and that sets out where we're going from here. Through Councillor Filipaina's work, we had a very useful and constructive rangatira meeting between the representatives that you put forward to be part of that with the Trust Board, and now it moves to the level of work between officials led on our side by our Chief Executive, Jim Stabak, and on their side by the Chief Executive, the Director, David Gamester. So I think through that work we've actually made quite some significant progress at bringing the museum and the council closer together, as is appropriate for an institution that we put 30 million plus into each year. And that is also an acknowledgement that through its role as an iconic institution, that the museum has a leading role to play in terms of our cultural and heritage sector. But I think if I pass over to you, Ed, I also have with us, and maybe, I don't know whether they want to come to the front table, Jignasha Patel, the Chief Financial Officer, and James Liddell, the External Relations Officer. Maybe you'd like to join Ed at the table, and welcome here. Ed, if I get you to lead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good afternoon, everyone. Look, I have very little to add to what the Mayor just said. Look, it's really pleasing to get to this point of receiving Auckland Museum's first quarterly report, which was requested by the Finance and Performance Committee in June this year. It represents the first step in an accountability journey by the Museum with Auckland Council. There are no substantive matters in this first quarter report that I want to draw your attention to, but obviously in the same way you do when the CCOs come in for these report backs, you could direct questions on the report to Jignasha and James. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And James or Jignasha, would you like to comment on the quarterly report? We've got the document, so you don't need to go to it through it in detail, but if there's anything you want to highlight in it, you're most welcome to.
Sure. Thank you very much. One of the things I'm not going to comment directly on the report itself, other than the fact that we remain cautiously optimistic around it. And in the past 2 months since the September, we have seen increased visitation. And while we're down around about 60% on prior year, we are seeing month-on-month increase. And with the recent opening of the South Atrium, we are seeing good traction in December to date as well. So again, I want to thank you all for your support, both in attending our openings, but also in working closer with us, in enabling us to succeed. So thank you on that.
Thank you very much for that. And I think I joked at the opening of the Southern Atrium, we could have had a governing body meeting there because we had a quorum. So thank you all the councillors for that were able to attend that. I'm going to ask Alf Filipina to move this and second it by Desley Simpson, and to invite questions and comments together. I don't think there's anything hugely controversial in this, but to give people a chance if they'd like to ask a question and make a brief comment. So, Councillor Wayne Walker, you have the call.
Sure. Just following on from you, Mr Mayor, I was very pleased to be amongst the quorum at the opening of the South Atrium. Would that we could have had a meeting on the spot, because I'm sure it would have been great and there would have been a lot of participation. That's another story. If I look going forward, I would make a very strong suggestion that the design of the atrium and the associated cafe and the shop will make an incredibly positive lift in the financial sustainability of the museum. So in that respect, I'm just signalling that it's going to be highly desirable to pick up some reporting around that in respect of the KPIs and so on. And I am very mindful that in respect of the museum, as compared to some other institutions that are within the council family, we actually have very good line of sight in terms of cost and revenue and capital movements around the museum and KPIs and so on. So I just want to commend the museum around that. It's quite excellent. There's just one other thing I want to signal, Mr Mayor, and that just goes to the cultural review and frankly other reviews or strategies going forward, and that is the necessity where we have a taonga, which the museum is, which is effectively a national taonga. The collections and so on there merit funding from the government, frankly. And that is something that we need to look at in terms of our, if not this LTP, then certainly other matters of financial support going forward from the government. And by way of a question, would the museum be able to assist us in providing some information around that?
Most certainly, and we'd appreciate your support for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Alf Filipina.
Thank you, Worship, and tēnā koutou to our presenters. Your Worship, the Rangatira to Rangatira meeting, just want to acknowledge yourself, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Simpson, who were there at the initial one. I think the interesting point is that we will have meetings when we need to have meetings with the Trust and the Chair. But in regards to the point that Councillor Walker just made around the government, that was already tabled by the Chair. That's exactly what the museum is doing. And we, at that meeting we had, was indicated our support for that. So that's already in motion, which is very good. Ed, I just want to acknowledge you in regards to our cultural institutions and the review, and also your ongoing support through the process that was outlined by His Worship the Mayor. And you know, to the museum, as always, it's around working together, and I want to end up, especially in the first half of next year, see the fruits to the conversations that you will have with the CEO and members of Auckland Council. So all the best for Christmas and the new year, and yeah, just thank you, and please pass it on to the Chair and the board, James, to walk it in. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. This isn't a controversial topic, so I'm going to put the recommendations that we note this report. All those. Sorry, it's been moved and seconded already by Councillor Philippiner and Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And if I can thank Jignasha and James and Ed for the work that they've all done together to bring the museum and the council closer, and to a big thank you to the museum for the fantastic work that you do. The atrium will make a big difference there, and it's an institution that we're proud of as a city, and that is reflected in the huge amount of financial support that we contribute through our ratepayers to the work that you do. Thank you very much for that. Right, we're now at item number 12. And I'd like to ask Ian Maxwell and Graham Ross to come forward. These are matters, item 12 is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Update referred by the Audit and Risk Committee. And maybe, I was going to ask Daniel, but I think he's out. Maybe I can ask Bill Cashmore and Shane Henderson to move and second this item. And Ian, if you'd like to speak to it.
Yes, look, thank you very much, Your Worship. So, look, the report primarily deals with the period through to the end of October. I'll cover a couple of other issues as we go through. And yes, it was considered by the Risk and Audit Committee earlier this month, so I'll be fairly brief in terms of running through things. So, look, following a review, a range of changes have been put in place concerning the activity of health, safety and wellbeing across council. We now have a full department reporting through to the Director of Group Services and a new General Manager position, and that those will be filled into the new year. And there's a whole range of other initiatives underway. And when we sat down with the Audit and Risk Committee at their next meeting in February, we'll be workshopping those actions to ensure that the priorities meet their expectations around this activity. We are working across the wider council group, so that workshop will include how we are working with our CCOs as well. Through this year, we've sought to monitor staff wellbeing through 2 surveys. This was a new initiative this year, and it really reflected the concerns of COVID at that time. So the surveys took place in the middle of the COVID lockdown and then subsequent to that. And it did identify a number of concerns around sense of belonging, connection, stress levels, perception of well-being, and just the way that our organisation and our people managers communicate with teams, particularly those who are working at home. And we have followed up, speaking to a number of staff about those matters. And look, it's the result of quite a wide range of impacts upon families, the economic situation in general, confidence about the future, as well as issues like working from home. So it's a mix of work issues as well as issues affecting them as individuals. Over this period, we have seen a return to normal levels of demand for our employees assistance program. So that fell away during lockdown, but it is now heading back towards normal levels. And basically, this program provides access to a whole variety of counselling and advice services. We've also identified and sat down with a number of individuals who had perhaps more complex and serious situations. And in that instance, what we do there is we pass them to more professional services that are operating outside of council in the sort of general health services. So, Your Worship, today I'm not going to address the matters directly associated with the recent unexpected deaths of Jay and Jenny. Those deaths will be subject to an investigation by an independent authority, the coroner, and this is normal in any situation such as that. There's also a second independent authority, WorkSafe, and they may also choose to investigate, and clearly we will work closely with either of those 2 agencies around those sorts of investigations. But what I will say is that we ourselves shall undertake a review of our policies, our processes, our procedures regarding sort of mental well-being in relation to work. The terms of reference for this are still being finalised, and the work will commence early next year, and it will be reported through to the Chief Executive with key findings and actions for implementation. So it's not directly related to either of the deaths, it's more of a general approach. We have proper agencies in our country to deal with specific situations, and those agencies will undertake any work in that regard. In November, Council responded to a request from the government by closing its offices and operations in the city centre, and that was the result, you might recall, of a community spread of COVID within the city centre. And we actually have some great experience, as you would expect, moving between the alert levels earlier this year. And look, the move at that time in terms of the city centre went very well, and that included not just council but the wider council group as well. And we've established contingency plans now should alert levels change during the upcoming holiday period. We've also tested and exercised how we would respond if a staff member or a customer tested positive to COVID, and we have those procedures in place, ready to go. And we're also holding good quantities of personal protection equipment, and again, we share those across the wider council group, sharing equipment and resources as needed. I think each of us are aware that our experience during COVID has significantly improved our capability to work from home. And for those staff who do have the option of working from home, and that's not all of our staff, we have many people who are working in libraries and pools and community centres who don't have that option. But for those who do, working at home has continued at high levels. And this does present a number of issues from a health, safety and wellbeing perspective. In short, the home becomes a workplace, becomes a council workplace. And the issue is, to what extent is that council's responsibility? And look, we are not alone in looking at this issue. Organisations right across New Zealand and indeed the Western world are facing that issue. And next year we will be looking, and I suspect working in association with a number of those employers across New Zealand, at what the situation is and what our responsibility is. Up until now, we have tended to treat it as a temporary phenomenon, but I think we're clearly moving into a more longer-term situation. Over this period, we've had 2 incidents that were notified to WorkSafe, and investigations have been completed by Auckland Council with respect to that incident, which occurred at the Henderson Waste Transfer Station. The station is actually one of our more hazardous operations. There's some significant risk that takes place there, and we've got quite a history of incidents that have occurred at that station. So as a result of that, we will be commencing work driven out of the Waste Solutions team, but involving others from across council, in developing proposals that will look at options for the redesign of the layout of that station, the operations that take place there, as well as the adjacent areas. Council actually owns some adjacent areas occupied by the animal management facility, and so we'll be looking at the total package as to whether we can actually create a safer environment there, and those first proposals will be available by the end of February. Over the period, the number of recorded incidents has reduced compared to previous periods. So we've seen a reduction in lost time injuries and medical treatment injuries. And on the face of it, that's a good outcome. Again, we believe that may be associated with increased working from home, but the outcome itself is good. We've also been concerned, and you'll see in the graphs in the report, that the time taken to resolve incidents has been creeping back up. So that is an issue for us, and we'll be focusing on managing that down in the first quarter of next year. You might notice too that the nature of the incidents has not changed, and the significance of aggressive behaviour remains very high. We're responding with training, lockdown drills, liaison with the police, safe rooms in many of our community facilities. And outside of this particular period, we've also been working very closely with the police and with respect to our services and facilities and our people serving those communities where some of the gang tensions in the city have been particularly high. And I'll come back to you at our next report dealing with how we've responded to that. So look, I'll stop there, and if there's any other questions, I'd be only too pleased to respond.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. Could I just acknowledge that you've been appointed Acting General Manager, responsible for health, safety and wellbeing as a result of the October 2020 review. So thank you for taking on that extra responsibility. If I just begin with a question, it was COVID-19's obviously had a huge impact in ways that we are aware of, and perhaps subtle ways that we're not aware of, but one of them is a lot more people working from home. And how has that affected our ability to maintain oversight over of the health and the well-being of the employees who might be connected electronically, but we're not seeing on a regular enough basis physically.
Yes, look, that is an issue that we've identified, and I think we're not alone in identifying that issue. The significance of some form of face-to-face contact to get I suppose, a general view of how people are at is important, and we are certainly working with our teams to promote that, to bring teams together back into the office on a more regular basis. But there are also, we have got people managers within our organisation that have developed some great initiatives in that regard, and we're also spreading that around to ensure that our direct people managers keep in touch, keep connected, encouraging people to maintain some sort of liaison with their work colleagues, but it's an ongoing issue.
Thank you very much. Now, if we just keep this first session relating to questions only, and then we'll come to comments if there are any. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, and congratulations. My question is around the Waitaku transfer station. With that accident, was that a staff member involved? Because I know that it's workplace health and safety, but I just want to know if that was a visitor or a staff member.
In this particular instance, it was a staff member, but our focus is not on just staff.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to ask you, that because it is, I've had many reports, including my husband, that say those barriers actually make it more unsafe because people trying to lift things, they can't get them over the barriers, and they're supposed to get them over the barriers, but it's actually hurting people because they can't get their rubbish over there. So that's really what I was making sure, that it was not just about staff, but about customers as well using that area.
Yes, it's definitely about customers.
Thank you very
about
much.
Staff, and there are ways. I mean, if you go to a modern transfer station, you don't have people walking out amongst the heavy vehicles, and so there are ways, engineering and design methodologies you can deploy to make it inherently safer.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora, Ian, and thank you for the work that you're doing around health, safety and wellbeing, especially at this difficult time. I have two questions, if I may. The first one is about, I think it's been raised in different forum about the concern about what budget cuts pressures are putting on staff and the extra stresses, and also just additional work that we're getting from government loaded onto council where we're not perhaps resourced. And I just wondered where we're getting visibility of that in terms of audit and risk, in terms of this reporting. I know it comes through slightly on the quarterly reports and the emergency budget, but I just feel we haven't really got a good sense of what our decisions are having, the impact our decisions are having on staff. And I raise this also because it came up at the Waiheke local board meeting last night, where Chair Handley addressed that to the meeting, that they did an acknowledgement for Jenny on at their meeting, and Chair Kath talked about this real concern about the cutting staff is having additional stress and causing concern. So I just would like to know where our visibility as governors is going to be around this issue.
So look, thanks very much. That's a great question. In terms of measures of workload, and so they're very difficult to nail down for individuals or teams, but that is something that we'll be working on. That is something we'll be workshopping with the Audit and Risk Committee early next year. At the moment, we rely on things such as leave, sick leave, those sorts of things. They're probably too general, and we'll be putting more work into trying to identify areas of workload. But I know the executive leadership team and the management of our organisation, that's an area of focus, and we can expect to see some improvements in terms of measurement and how we respond to those issues going into the new year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I had just, if I may, a second question, a quick one. Yep. But sorry, just to clarify, so that will be reported through the Audit and Risk Committee?
We'll be workshopping alternative ways initially, and then we'll have to develop some measures for it.
Thank you. And just sorry, a quick part about, I don't want to be the class monitor about the climate impact statement, but again, we've got a very strange interpretation of what that statement is about. And so in the report, for example, it's talking about working from home, which actually has a clear impact on our group emissions and our commitment to our goal of reducing emissions. So there's a perfect little statement that could be in there, rather than writing this report did not involve any climate change. So I just wondered, I know this is work in progress, but are steps in place that we're going to start rethinking what this statement is about in the writing of reports?
It's my fault. I apologise. I will ensure that that's better presented next time. And I'm sure there are steps in place, but I probably just did not take advantage of them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ian, the people working from home, often in different circumstances, we have had instances reported toward risk of the wrong equipment, not supported properly. And I asked you at the Audit and Risk Committee, what will be changing around our procedures and permissions to allow people to use council equipment, supporting equipment in their private residence?
Yes, that's one of the issues that we need to look at. At present, we provide, as an organisation, a safe place to work at work, and people have a choice, and it depends on essentially a negotiation. Is it good for the organisation, good for the team, good for the individual? But there is a safe place to work at work, and so the issue is, how far does one go as an employer in terms of ensuring the health, safety and wellbeing of a person at work when they have an alternative here? And that's the sort of debate that needs to take place, and some decisions made about the extent of responsibility by an employer such as council for staff who are working at home on a more frequent basis.
So if I may, Mr. when is that decision? I imagine it's an ELT decision. When will that be made, do you know?
We were looking to work through that in the first quarter of next year.
Thank you. Last question, Councillor Wayne Walker.
What you're doing is really great, Ian. I'm making the assumption that in respect of the things that you're developing, that there's a separate but related set of support for councillors and local board members, because essentially we fall outside this, but equally we've been working at home, sometimes perhaps more so than officers, and obviously there's the issue around the support and so on that we receive, and quite obviously our workplaces that are not a council responsibility. So I'm making the assumption that there's a carryover for us and local board members. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Yes, I think that's a correct assumption. There's so I'm sure we can talk about who's an employee and who's not, and where elected members fit, but clearly you're part of this organisation, and we need to ensure as an organisation we support you, and I know many of you have similar sorts of issues in terms of aggressive customers or aggressive community members, and I think that's certainly something we need to talk about, and I know a number of you have highlighted situations, even in a room such as this, if you're dealing with a very difficult topic. It's a very open area, and we may need to think those things through as well.
Thank you very much. Just before I move to comments, if there are any, I just want to get a sense of the room. We've got two more items from Audit and Risk report backs, 13 and 14. 15 has been withdrawn, and 16 and 17 are simply summary of information. Would you like to take a break at the end of this item and come back half an hour later, or would you like to finish the agenda? Keep going? That's okay. That was the answer I was hoping to get. Right. Any comment on this? If not, sorry, Al Filippina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Ian, I want to thank you in regards to now hearing you got the new role, because I remember a conversation you had, I think it was last year, about retiring. So, so look, congratulations, and I think more importantly, thank you. Thank you for taking the role on, and look, I just look forward to the work that you'll be continued. So that's it, Your Worship. Thanks.
Thank you. And Ian, retirement's much overrated. Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you. I did want to congratulate Ian as well. You're the right person for this job. I was able to ask all of my questions at Audit and Risk, my second favourite committee after Value for Money. I want to congratulate the organisation on the attention that it is putting into our people, particularly and specifically the impacts of COVID and working from home, and importantly going forward, the impacts of the savings that we're finding that will impact on staff and their health, mental health and wellbeing. So I look forward to what you're going to bring after the workshops, but congratulations, Jim, on ensuring that this is really getting its attention and that we have the right man for the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor John Watson, last comment.
Thanks. I just want to make a few general comments, Mr Mayor, before I get to some of the specific items. And the first one really goes to our position as officers in terms of health and safety under the Health and Safety Act. One of the first pieces of paper we're given at the start of each term is this outline of our responsibilities as it goes to ensuring Council's primary duty to ensure people's safety. One of the parts of it talks about ensuring the Council implements and processes for complying with any duty are carried through on, and it specifically says to elected representatives what you need to do. It's not, what you may do, it's what you need to do. The first thing is to analyse information you're provided, which I assume that's happening to a greater or lesser extent now. Ask for more information if you think you need it. I don't know if that happens too often. And this key phrase for me, which is repeated throughout this document on a number of occasions, ask searching and probing questions. Searching and probing questions. I don't know if that has occurred too often. And the reason I say that is that in the last term of council, with one of these similar items, for me anyway, there's a rather disturbing revelation from one of the health and wellbeing surveys where in 2017 there were over 20% of the employees that have been surveyed in this organisation who had some issue going to depression or anxiety. That to me, without having any comparative to other big organisations, I took as a bit of a red light. The subsequent follow-up in terms of probing and searching questions from the assembled multitude here, myself included, wasn't exactly thorough, and it took quite some time actually for that item to, in the first place, to come back, and secondly to get any sense of what organisational response there was to what I thought 20%, 1 in 5 is a disturbing statistic by any account. In the past, in terms of sensitive issues, if we're going to staff health and wellbeing, when they've come up before some of us, it's actually been very difficult to plot a course which those people might take if they come to you in confidence, or if they come to you in as part of some anonymous plea, as has been the case on a couple of occasions. Actually, how to assure the degree of independence and anonymity that anyone with any sense of experience, employee relations knows is fundamental for people to be able to say their piece, to be able to tell what's happened to them, and to have some confidence that people are listening and following through on it. And I say that in an organisational sense, not from people sitting around here largely isolated from the 98–99% of people who work over there or work in other workplaces around Auckland, which I have, and I'll be the first to admit it, have very little insight into their daily experiences in terms of co-workers, in terms of managerial pressures, in terms of dealings with the public. It just doesn't occur. So I think some of the information that heard from Ian today in terms of the own council investigation, I will be interested to see what comes out of that. When I read the report before us today in terms of well-being, the first part of it concentrates around the COVID-19 period and people's experiencing there, and that kind of working from home, that sense of belonging as you would in some ways respect, has decreased. Stress has conversely increased in relation to COVID-19. I don't think council employees will be unique in that. And one of the encouraging aspects is the degree of self-reflection from the organisation, saying that some of the communications have been less than effective, and that the organisations go looking to deal with it. I guess similarly with the small number of people that have been dealt with at point 30, that will be statistically inevitable in a big organisation too, that sorts of personal issues to do with stress and depression come in. That's a consequence of having such a big workforce. But the one I really wanted to concentrate on, and I don't think has really been adequately addressed at any time, is really the specific pressures in this organisation at the moment as they go to the impact of a kind of recession and job insecurity, which is particularly relevant when you are the only organisation for that employment. So for a lot of other people, they don't have a choice. The 8 legacy councils have gone, this is it. If you lose your job here, there's lots of consequential flow-ons that didn't exist before the super city. So I guess in terms of those probing and searching questions that are meaningful to the people involved, that is the staff, not necessarily the people around here, I'll be looking to see how we're addressing that combination of job cuts, that reliance on this council as the only employer, and also to do with the kind of power structures that have been enabled by the super city in terms of the hierarchy and the ability to enable people to have independent and objective and safe recourse when it goes to their own job, and how they may be being treated by any number of people, but particularly people from within the workforce. So I thank you for that, Ian, and I, for one, in the future anyway, will hopefully fulfilling a little bit more of that role that's been outlined to us at the very start of the term by the Health and Safety Act. Thank you.
Thank you. And one further speaker, Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to, through you, Chair, thank the team, especially the ELT members, Jim, Patricia, Phil and Ian on this. Patricia has updated me along the last couple of weeks about this process as well, and I think it's really good for us to be going on this track. I don't think any of us, well, I've been sort of pushing on this a couple of times. Ollie, at the beginning, I remember a couple of years ago, previous health and safety manager, found it difficult to get some of the promotion side of it, and I think the last couple of years we really have ramped up the focus not on just physical health and risk, but the mental health and well-being side, and we definitely are moving forward on that at pace, which I think is really important. The other thing is, and yes, I have been vocal, but a lot, sort of an overwhelming number of staff have contacted me on this, and I just want to ensure, I guess my comment, it's not a question, that the channels are as open as possible, and I know you're committed to that, Jim, but the channels are open as possible for people to report, people to put their concerns forward and have that time out, also without feeling that it may affect future job prospects while there's redundancies and things going on, because I know that balance for some people, whether it's a real fear or not, can be difficult. So I've been kind of overwhelmed by some of the comments of people who have left or changed jobs within the organisation because of maybe a public-facing role or a role working with some elected members or local boards over time, or very tough issues that we all face as well. But just want to say, I know this has been a big body of work for a long time, and we really are pushing ahead, and all of us support doing whatever we can to help. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So the motion is that we note the update and that the report has gone to local boards. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 13 is also a reference from Audit and Risk. It's the annual report on the performance of the Audit and Risk Committee. the chair, Sue Sheldon, wasn't available today, unfortunately, but she said that she'd welcome any questions if members wish to be in email contact with her. Maybe I'll ask Councillor Newman to move it as the Deputy Chair, and Deputy Mayor to second it. Is there anything, Councillor Newman, you want to add to the report? It's pretty self-evident. Okay, are there any questions or comments? We'll put them together. Councillor Cooper.
Just quickly, I just want to thank the Audit and Risk Committee, but what gives me great confidence is that we have an independent chair, and that, for me, signals to our public that we're not just ticking ourselves off, ticking the box for us, but we've actually got someone who's highly qualified that can give that overview and some confidence to what we do alongside our councillors that are on this committee and the other independents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and I absolutely endorse that comment. I think we've got high-quality private sector people on there. We are not judge and jury in our own case, and the change we made in the last term of council, I think, was a big step forward, and good news. So I'll put that the resolution that we receive the report. Sorry. Councillor Simpson.
Just to that end, I wondered if it would be appropriate for the mover and seconder to agree that we thank our independent chair, Sue Sheldon, for her work throughout the year. I mean, this is their annual report. If it's not, I'll just say I endorse what Councillor Cooper and yourself have had said.
Yeah, I think, look, we could, with agreement of everybody here, amend the recommendation, receive the annual report on the Performance and Audit and Risk Committee, and thank Sue Sheldon for her chairing, and the Paul Condon and Bruce Robertson for their contribution to the work of this committee. So I think if the mover and seconder are happy with that, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come now to the last of the items referred to by the Audit and Risk Committee, the Enterprise Risk Quarterly Update, and we have Emma Mosley with us. Again, if I can maybe ask Councillors Newman and Cashmore to move and second this, and Emma, if you'd like to report on this. Of note on it is, of course, the risk factor of America's Cup 36, and the first race is about to start in 2.25 hours. So that will be an indication of whether the people that we've had working on this have got all the pieces in place. But Emma, if you'd like to lead off the discussion, please.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'm Emma Mosley. You have received updates via the Audit and Risk Committee on the Enterprise Risk Management quarterly, and this is our standard quarterly update. The update this quarter covers three substantive areas. One is the AC36 program, reporting on that, and the Audit and Risk Committee received a verbal update. Given the important day today, staff have put through a request that they not attend today, but we have tabled and circulated to you the most recent updates in writing that have been provided both to elected members and local boards. So you have that information to hand, and if you do have any questions with regards to the AC36 program and how it's going, although I hear it's all good, I'm very happy to take that back and bring you answers to your questions. The second substantive part of the report relates to the LTP risks. The LTP program is, of course, a critical piece of work underway, taking a lot of your time and the entire organisation's mahi to successfully negotiate the process and do the important work there. The management of risk through that program is very important so that we safely bring that to its conclusion, and the risk experts in my team are closely working with the finance and other teams on that. There have been questions in the past from elected members around how we are incorporating risk into that work, and there is significant efforts being made, including around capital prioritisation, but other areas as well, and the risk team is involved in those efforts as well. The overall profile is well established now around the risks, and the work is being closely monitored and worked on as we go through the process. The third part of the report is an update on our top risk reset. When I appeared last quarter, we signalled that we were about to commence a full review and reset of our top risks with elected members and with our executive leadership team. The main objective of this is to ensure that we are strategically aligned and we are focused on the critical outcomes that we need to deliver on behalf of the council and our communities. In the report, we outline the outcome of that process, and that is 11 top risks. I was hoping for a nice round number 10, but we have identified 11 key areas, key risk areas that we need to focus on in order to achieve our strategic outcomes. The top risk list, if you like, provides an evolution of our previous top risks. So you will see that there are a number of top risks that are not in the same wording, but they're all still there. But the framing of them has been carefully crafted so as to focus on our strategic outcomes. And I'll just go through to there. So this slide provides a short form list of those 11 top risks, showing the alignment back to our strategic outcomes in the 4 areas, and importantly our cornerstone, our chartered behaviours, which are critical to successful delivery as well. Our work is not done. That is a constant process in terms of identifying and assessing and making sure we're taking the appropriate actions and steps to manage our risks. We have started the work to work with each of the ELT sponsors who are taking responsibility and accountability for each risk area to do the full evaluation with the right subject experts, and that work will be reported back to this to Audit and Risk Committee, and then through back to this committee in February and early March, when we will have a more complete picture. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Emma. And if I run questions and comments together, I just want to make a comment about America's Cup 36. This is something that's preoccupied us for about 3 years, and frankly the risk level was really, really high, beginning with whether we would get the work done on time. I represented council down at a function for the Wynyard Edge Alliance earlier this week, and I said in my speech that here's some information that will make no headlines. What was that information? That they completed the infrastructure on time, under budget, and wait for it, with 0 injury time lost. Now, if we'd failed on either of the first 2, it would have been a headline. They had 2 days, the Alliance, to put in their expression of interest. 2 days. They had an incredibly complex job to do. The water quality at the end of Daldy Street, the Wynyard Wharf renewal, the removal of the hazardous substance tanks and the capping of the soil there, the bringing to life of that waterfront area and new public spaces and new spaces for marine sports is a real success story for council and MB working together through the Wynyard Edge Alliance, and I'd like to just note our appreciation of the efforts of that team. Secondly, we have measures in place, less funding available because of the COVID-19 and the emergency budget, but a report back to us here that in any of the changes that have been made for management of events, they have succeeded in putting those in place without risk to health or safety, and that's really important. So this will be an event that I think will bring the city to life over the summer period, and it's not been without its challenges right up to the last moment, but just want to acknowledge all of those that worked on it and brought it to this point where now we see the fruition of those efforts in the first race starting in just a couple of hours' time. So any other questions and comments about this report? If not, Councillor Fletcher.
As was recorded with Ian, who is a remarkable officer and well worthy of commendation, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that Emma is one of those very quiet, dignified professionals who serves this council extremely well, and I'd like to acknowledge her and wish her well for Christmas.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor, and thank you very much, Emma, for the work that you've put in over the year. You're right on top of the game, so we appreciate that very much. So I'll move that those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. We come to item number 15, which has been withdrawn. Actually, the item will come back to, I think, Chairman Simpson, to Finance and Performance in February. That will still allow the item to be included in the consultation round, but there was a concern that they didn't have all of the information that they needed. They wanted to make sure it was absolutely right, and that's the reason why the paper has been withdrawn. So we come then to item number 16, and that's just a process paper. So I'll ask Councillor Walker to second. Summary of Governing Body Information Memorandum. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 17 is a summary of confidential decisions and related information released into the open. I'll move, and I'll look to my right this time. Councillor Simpson to second. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Consideration of extraordinary business, there is none. And so I just want very quickly, because I stand between you and your Christmas lunch in the Councillors' Lounge downstairs, and we have some matters that have been organised by Councillor Filipaina following that you're all aware of. But as the last meeting of the year, I think some of the discussion today suggests that it's not only the staff, but some of us that are probably feeling a little tired at the end of a hard year. So I just want to acknowledge both our staff, and first of all our staff. Jim, and if you can pass that on to everyone, our executive leadership team, but all of our staff through the building for the huge efforts that they've put in under really trying circumstances this year. I might invite actually Councillor Simpson, when I finish, just to say a few words about the finance team. I don't want to just highlight the finance team. They've done a splendid effort, but right across the board, I think we're well served by our staff, and I want to note my appreciation for that. But I also want to note my appreciation for everybody around this table. We're all different individuals. We don't always agree. Sometimes things get a little bit tetchy, but I want to thank everybody here. You've put in a particularly hard year's work, and I just want to make sure that everybody around this table has a chance for a break over the Christmas and New Year period. It is the one time of the year when you are largely free of council duties. Some things are delegated to the Chief Executive and some things to the Mayor, but I hope everybody here just has a fantastic Christmas, still COVID-free, we hope. Only 1 week to go now, and that you get the chance for quality time with family and friends, a chance to relax, become rejuvenated, and look forward to a year next year, which hopefully will be a better year for the country, the city and the council, but one that will still be very, very demanding. So thank you everyone for your efforts, and have a great Christmas and New Year. And Councillor Simpson, I think you wanted to say a few words as well.
Look, I did. And Jim, I hope Kevin's not in the room, but Peter I know is. And I just want to have a huge thanks for the finance team. You know, many haven't had any break throughout the year. Things were very different when we started the year to where we got to in the middle, and certainly where we've ended. So please pass on all our collective thanks to the team. They've worked incredibly hard, and many hours of the night, you know, up to midnight, early hours of the morning. Your Worship, I also just wanted to mention, and Councillor Hills has reminded me, a note of thanks to Cecily, who's leaving after 20 years. She supported us all as CSA manager. And it would be nice in a public forum to say thank you to her too. So I'd just like to say that as well.
Can we pass that by acclamation? Okay, Councillor Filipaina.
Sorry to keep everybody, but this afternoon is 3 o'clock for those, and I know that some councillors won't be able to make it because of other events, but the staff will be there at 3 o'clock, but they will be setting the place up. So for those councillors, once you finish dinner, I'll see you on 26, and we can try out the karaoke machine. And yeah, and I think everybody's been told what they needed to bring, but we're going to have heaps of food. Yeah, and I know that the video's off now. Homie, no? Can you? Oh, look, I just want to.
No, so keep it seemly, councillor.
Yeah. So, okay, can you turn it off or? Yeah. Yeah, it's off now.